From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
It's just great to be here at, that's fine. It gives me a chance to move around a little bit. To be here at the Acres Conference, I can remember the first time that Charlie Walters asked me to come and talk was about 1990. Fred might know better. And I didn't know at the time, but he and his dad had quite a negotiation deal about whether they could take a risk on this young rookie dude, you know. And so they only gave me 20 minutes. So I practiced at home, and I got to be at this slide, in 5 minutes, this slide, And so it's a real honor to be here back on this stage in home ground. I don't always have sympathetic audiences these days, and so it's great to be here with the choir. I've been tasked with the message this evening that's the most common question I get from media, from anybody that does an interview. I get two questions. I'm only going to deal with one of them tonight because the other one is another. I'll have to come back and do that another time. But the two questions are, this all sounds warm and fuzzy and really nice, but can we really feed the world this way? And the second one is, even if we could, can we afford it? Price. The old elitist, you're a bunch of food snobs kind of thing. And those two are powerful questions. And so I'm going to deal with the one about can we feed the world. Because at the end of the day, if we can't convince our neighbors, our family, our friends, the naysayers out there, the people at church, at Civic Club, at the soccer game, if we can't articulate how we can feed the world, nothing we say, nothing we do, nothing we promote is going to make sense because nobody wants their grandchildren to starve to death. And, I grew up, and I'm still called a bioterrorist, a typhoid Mary, by the conventional neighbors. I've been called a murderer because, everybody says if we did what we did, you have to pick which half of the world to starve to death. You ever heard that? I remember that very, very well. We had our Commission of Agriculture in Virginia when I was just starting in, and I remember reading the official Virginia Ag Report. Mason Carbaugh was our Secretary, Commissioner of Agriculture, and he said anybody that wants to do organic farming is just paying Russian roulette with half the world's population because half of them would have to die in order to, do this. And so I've grown up with that. So I'm going to start with a broad history lesson, okay? Because lots of times, I don't know about you, but, when you start getting into little details, well, I'll trade you one piece of data for your piece of data and this one piece of data. Pretty soon it gets all bogged down in a bunch of, as we used to say in college debate, who can drag the most dead bodies across the flow sheet, And so rather than doing that, I want to back up and deal with a much broader kind of philosophical, historical idea that I hope will help us to be able to articulate things. The first thing is pre-European America. So I want you to just think about that a minute. Pre-European America produced more food than we do today. Okay? There were 200 million beavers. Beavers are vegetarians. That's in hot vogue today. Now, all that food didn't go to people. All right, that's what you got to realize. That food didn't all go to people. But there were 200 million beavers who ate more food, more salad, more produce. They didn't eat tomatoes, but they ate vegetables, produce. They're vegetarians, than all the people in the country today. Just the beavers. There were a couple 100 million bison. 2 million wolves, each of whom needed 20 pounds of meat a day. 20 pounds of meat times 2 million wolves is 40 million pounds of meat. That's a lot of meat a day. Birds. Audubon sat under a tree in about 1800. He recorded in his diary. He said, I couldn't see the sun for 3 days for the flock of birds that flew over. Anybody seen a flock of birds so big it blotted out the sun for 3 days lately? They were passenger pigeons, now extinct. So you got to realize, too, that 90% of the indigenous population between 1492 and 1600, that's 1 century basically, okay, in that century, 90% of the native population died from European diseases. 90%. Just think about the people that you know in your life. If 90% of them were not here. Just imagine if 90% of us in this room were not here. It would be just a little corner right over here. So this big empty land that these Europeans found was a brand new ecosystem. And so when the Europeans came, I can say because this is my background, we came as exploiters. Okay? And exploitation, I think, and extraction just moves in the American DNA. It's part of our cultural DNA. So that by the time of Thomas Jefferson, we had really huge soil societies. These were all private clubs. But already by the early 1800s, the question of how to maintain fertility was one of the biggest questions of colonial America or post-revolution America. How to maintain fertility. And they were always looking for the virgin forest, to be able to get new soil moving west. And if you read Jefferson's farm book, it's got essentially the 4 pillars of industrial agriculture. Their mindset of agriculture was built on exports, fertility from somewhere else, always looking for fertility from somewhere else. Between 1820 and 1840, the entire millennia buildup of booby, pelican, and cormorant poop in Chile was exported by steamer to the U.S. and the British Isles. It was 100 feet deep. Chinese slaves were brought over. Many of them jumped from the cliffs for suicide because of the terrible working conditions they were in, hand digging that bird poop to fertilize in America, and 20 years to take it all away. So exports, fertility from somewhere else. Number 3, arable grain farming, the Holy Grail. Pasture was only viewed as necessary for draft animals. At that time, 1/3 to 1/2 of every farm was dedicated to its energy source. The mule, the horse, the ox, okay? So, that's where the pasture was. But the Holy Grail was grain. Grain was very, very expensive. You read Jefferson's book, the cost of an herbivore per pound compared to a chicken was extremely expensive. Omnivores were expensive. Herbivores were cheap because they could live on perennials that didn't require tillage or harvesting by hand and keeping the rats and mice out of them in a day before, grain bins and butler buildings. And the 4th pillar it was based on cheap labor, in that case, slaves. If you look at today's agriculture, today's conventional agriculture, those 4 pillars are still in our agricultural DNA. Exports, we don't have to feed ourselves. We can just export it all to everywhere else and import it back to us. Fertility comes from somewhere else. It certainly doesn't come from the farm. And grain is still the subsidized Holy Grail and, of course, cheap labor. So in 1837, that was a kind of a big year. 1837, 3 things happened. Justice von Liebig in Austria presented to the world the notion, using his vacuum tubes, that all of life is simply a rearrangement of 3 elements: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK. He's the father, and he was working on the fertility problem. I mean, that's the point to understand. He wasn't here to try to destroy earthworms. He wasn't here to try to, change. He was there to try to solve the fertility problem. But that was a big deal, to say that life is just a rearrangement of N, P, and K, inert material. At the same year, Cyrus McCormick invented the reaper in a blacksmith shop 10 miles from our house in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. This was the beginning of the International Harvester Company, and, of course, eventually moved it to Chicago with the westward expansion and the Transatlantic Railroad. But this was the official start. If you read your history books, 1837, when Cyrus McCormick invented the reaper, that took the scythe out of grain harvesting. That was a big deal. And that's the official start of the Industrial Revolution, which was also the catalyst. Then the next development of that was the urbanization, the rural flight to the factory. And the third thing that happened that year, so you have Justus von Liebig telling us that all of life is just N, P, and K. You have Cyrus McCormick inventing the reaper, starting the Industrial Revolution, mechanical innovation. And then the third thing that happened that year was a Britisher set sail on a little ship called the Beagle, Charles Darwin, and took God out of creation. And so you had a perfect storm set up for a new paradigm toward life. You take God out of creation, you take the mystery you take the biology out of life, and you add in a heavy dose of mechanics, and suddenly you have changed the entire world's paradigm toward life to one that is primarily mechanical, not biological. In fact, all the ancient religions of the world and cultures of the world, from animism to paganism to theism, all viewed life with some sort of a spiritual element, some sort of mysterious thing that was reverentially hard to measure. You moved gently around life. But if it's just mechanical stuff, it doesn't matter. And so we had the development of the industrial paradigm, which is outlined very beautifully by John Eichard, professor emeritus at the University of Missouri, with 4 pillars. The 4 pillars of the industrial paradigm are specialization, simplification, routinization, and mechanization. Need those again? Specialization, simplification, routinization, and mechanization. I'm a Luddite. I don't do PowerPoints and stuff. You just have to watch me. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. But if you think about biology and nature and ecology, that is exactly opposite these 4 pillars. Nature's not specialized, it's diversified. Nature's not simplified, it's complex. Nature doesn't like routine, it likes dynamic, change. And it doesn't like mechanization. Life is fundamentally biological. Nature is fundamentally biological, has a mind of its own. So this proceeded. It came right on through the 1800s. So that by 1900, as the industrial age is in full bore, we've got massive movement from rural America to the cities and urbanization around the developed part of the world in Europe and the British Isles. Many people, think tanks, were writing papers on the coming starvation. The world's going to starve to death. City metropolitan newspapers were full of editorials about the demise of the city. You know why the city was going to collapse? It was going to collapse under poop. There was poop everywhere. It was in the streets. It was in the sidewalks. You tracked it into the bake shop. You tracked it into the coffee house, the tavern. In fact, in Charles Dickens' England, one of the first jobs that poor boys would do in the streets of London was they would stand at the streets and they'd carry brooms, and for a couple of, I don't know, they didn't have pennies, whatever they had, tuppence or whatever, but whatever their little coin was, aristocrats would hand a little bit of coin to one of these boys, and they would run ahead of them, the street sweep the horse poop aside so that aristocrats could walk across the street without getting a bunch of horse poop all over their. But it's hard for us to appreciate what urbanization prior to the automobile did. When with draft power, you simply couldn't transport all the poop out of the city fast enough. You couldn't bring enough fodder into the city to feed them fast enough, and all the liveries and the stables and all that stuff. And so cities were literally imploding in poop. And it was causing disease, dysentery, brucellosis, all sorts of issues. Of course, that urbanization, created the swill dairies that we all know that finally, eventuated in pasteurization and all that stuff. It's just important to understand that the whole food and farm sector was involved with shoveling poop. Farmers, meanwhile, with new, reapers and the steam engine and the new, threshing machines, mechanization, they were losing their sons especially. They were losing their children to the cities where the jobs were, the factories were, good steady employment, nice big paycheck. So these old farmers, they're getting older and they're getting tired of shoveling. And the soil was losing its fertility because of this export of foodstuffs to the city. And so there was a tremendous, concern. We're all going to starve to death. And the cities are going to be covered up with poop. Nobody realized in 1900 that within just a little over a decade, they would be saved by the automobile. Sometimes salvation comes in strange places. So this is all going on. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. Okay? Meanwhile, back at the ranch. There's a man working tirelessly in India named Sir Albert Howard. And he is being taught by the Indians a decomposition process that he later called the indoor method in deference to his Indian mentors. And he spent his career developing the scientific aerobic composting method. And for the first time in human history, we had an actual, we had a scientific understanding of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, water, and microbes, and the ratios and the balance of the browns and the greens and the moisture and all. This was all scientifically formulated and duplicated. With fertility tests, even doing trials of feeding, hoof and mouth disease cows and showing that was a dietary problem, and all sorts of cool things that Sir Albert Howard did, which we documented in his seminal work of 1943, and most of you have read it or you're familiar with it, An Agricultural Testament, which is considered the official start of the kind of organic farming rejuvenation in America. Just like Wendell Berry's Unsettling of America is kind of considered the modern, sustainable ag big development. This book came out in 1943. Now, other things are happening globally. All right? We have 2 world wars. You know what they make bombs out of? Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Explosives. Okay? So this is all happening while Sir Albert Howard is working in India. It's 1947 now. The war is over. You're a farmer. You have a fertility problem. and you're presented two options. One is a cheap bag of 10-10-10 leftover explosives they call fertilizer. And the other is this wacko Britisher named Sir Albert Howard who presents to me a carbon alternative, a decomposition carbon alternative. But as I look at that alternative, you know what it requires? Shoveling. I don't have a front-end loader. I don't even have a tractor. I've still got mules. Probably it's 1947. I've still got mules. A couple of my kids have already gone to town. We're already labor poor. Or, labor, we're low labor on the farm. What would I have done? We'd all like to sit here and think, well, we would have done that compost thing. Not so quick. See. So I think it's really good for us to slice old Grandpa some slack. Okay? Us being in the same position, we might have picked the same thing. But there were prescient people at the time. Sir Albert Howard, Lady Balfour, Eliot gave us a wonderful memory lane last night of some of these pillars. Rodale, Louis Bromfield, Ed Faulkner. 1950, he wrote Plowman's Folly and A Second Look, Soil Development. Can you imagine a book like that being written today? Plowman's Folly, that in 6 months would sell 500,000 copies in 6 months. We had a lot of farmers back then. All right, now we're going to take just a little interlude, and I want to explain the diffusion of innovation. There's a book by that title. Business guys read it all the time. But in the diffusion of innovation, it talks about the lag time to metabolize a point of innovation. So at that time, the point of it, trust me, I'm going somewhere. This is point one. There's going to be 5 of them. Okay? All right. At that time, there was the tip of societal innovation was urbanization, the factory, the concentration of manufacturing in a place. Henry Ford, the assembly line. This is before indoor plumbing, before electricity, refrigeration, sanitary sewage disposal, pipes, all this. The first supermarket was in 1946. So this is all happening, this urban innovation. To help us understand this lag time of innovation, let me give you 2 examples from today, right now, that we can appreciate. The first one is the local sales tax collection. Many of us are in communities and areas where there's a local sales tax, and it was developed back in the 70s and 80s, and it was all based on a physical cash register. You walk into a shop, and you hand a guy cash, he punches the cash register, and 2%, 3%, whatever is part of the sales tax, and that's what helps to fund the local and state government. Are you with me? Well, suddenly here comes e-commerce, Amazon, the internet, and all this, and suddenly there's no cha-ching, there's no cash register, there's no local store, there's no nothing. And so our culture and our politicians and officials and minds bigger than mine have been, and I'm not big on taxes, but I also appreciate if you're trying to, fix some things and do some things for the community, and your income stream is coming from a certain direction, and suddenly that income stream dies, it's kind of a big deal, right? And so we're gradually fixing this right now, aren't we, with new software packages. Anybody that, even a very small business that ships across the state line, you now got software, and you're going to have to be turning in the sales tax and filling it in. So it's gradually gotten fixed. But it's taken about 15 years, hasn't it, to get that fixed. Another one that's coming up that's going to be looming in the next 5 to 10 years is the mining of metadata. And we're seeing these private these private entities like Facebook and of course in China it's Alibaba and you know, Amazon, whatever. Not in China, but anyway, here. But we're seeing these big social media platforms being subjected to new scrutiny, perhaps regulatory censorship, being called up, you know, before Congress. And there will be hearings on the prejudice and exclusion from the public discourse via social media and how we can stop that. Everybody with me? This is diffusion of innovation right in front of us. So if the answer to fertility is a carbon economy, what we needed was plastic pipe for water. We needed chippers for biomass, chainsaws to cut instead of to chip and cut trees instead of burning them. We needed front-end loaders for materials handling, and we needed efficient PTO manure spreaders for hauling, among other things. None of that existed in 1947. Everybody follow? By mid-1950s, these elements were developing. By 1960, they were all in place. By 1970, they were all refined to perfection. It took roughly 20 years to metabolize Sir Albert Howard's gift to the world of composting. 20 years. We weren't the only ones busy during those 20 years. The other side was really busy. The leftover NP and K stockpiles from World War II. The war effort had leveraged the mechanical side with mining, manufacturing, distribution, and marketing. So it's almost like in 1945, 6, 7, when we wiped ourselves off from World War II and a gun started for a new race to fertility and agriculture. The other side had a big head start. And they had already populated research, the USDA. They were all stacked with food mechanics. And those of us who appreciate the biological component of life were not at the table. The bottom line is, if we had had a Manhattan Project for compost, okay? If we had had a Manhattan Project for compost, not only would we have fed the world, we would have done it without infertile frogs, three-legged salamanders, and a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico. That's the soundbite I want you to remember. Okay? Because people get the Manhattan Project and the effort that went into that. And I'm not denigrating. I'm just saying if we tend to be successful at what we put our energy to, don't we? And so now, here we are in 2018. Now, there's no contest. We've got four-wheel drive front-end loaders. We've got chippers. We've got compost thermometers. We've got emulsified biological concentrates. We've got electromagnified foliars sprayed with calypso music to open the stomata. We got worm tea or worm pee if you'd rather have it. We got everything out there, the whole trade show. Look at this stuff. And we're spinning circles around the chemical approach, but they just don't know it yet.
Hi there, just wanted to interrupt this episode to make sure that you have heard about our Acres 2024 EcoAg Conference. This year's event will be held in Madison, Wisconsin from December 2nd through December 5th. I think we have put together one of the best lineups for a conference in the regenerative and organic agriculture space. Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, and their team from Understanding Ag, along with Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Gary Zimmer, Mark Shepard, Dr. Nasha Winters, Megan Neubauer, Matt Powers, Nigel Palmer, Will Harris, Jeff Poppin, Aaron Silva, Austin Unruh, Andre Liu, Jay Fearer, Steve Diver, and many more. So if you're interested, feel free to give us a call at 970-392-4464 or email us at support@acresusa.com. You can also register online at acresusa.com/eco-ag.
like it took our side a while to metabolize Sir Albert Howard's simple truth. It will take a while. It will take a while for your neighbors and your family and your friends on the other side to metabolize the truth coming out of Acres conferences, because the conventional orthodoxy, the inertia, is still on their side. And it'll take a while for them to wake up one day, and it's one drip at a time. Oh, I've got new diseases. Oh, I've got new sicknesses. Oh, my drugs don't work. Oh, But it's one step at a time. It's okay. It's okay. It comes one step at a time. Number 2, they won't all be that long. Trust me. But isn't that interesting? When you look at it in that, I hope that helps you as you talk to your neighbors and friends, and they all just, they're naysaying and all this doesn't actually work. I hope that gives you a whimsical walk down historical path to be able to express it in a non-confrontational, actually, as a way to understand innovation. And it places us at the helm of innovation. The other side's a bunch of Neanderthals. They just don't realize it. Okay? But it's a nice way to say it without saying they're Neanderthals. All right. Number 2. Still answering the question, can we feed the world? Number 2. We have millions of acres of unused land in this country. We have 35 million acres of lawn. And I normally don't have to put a big, apologetic in front of this next one or a caveat, but here in Kentucky, I feel like I need to. We have 36 million acres housing and feeding recreational horses. Okay? Now this is absolute, trust me, I'm not saying it's a sin to have a lawn. I'm not saying it's a sin to have a horse. Don't read more into this. I'm just saying when we talk about feeding the world, there's a lot of underutilized, unleveraged acres. And I haven't even gotten into BLM land. State parks, national parks. I remember very well when Governor Tim Kaine, he's now our senator, one of our senators in Virginia, toward the end of his gubernatorialship, he wanted to come and see the farm. So he came up with his entourage of six guys that are 7 feet tall and no necks and wires hanging out of their necks. I throw him on a hay wagon, and we take a ride around the farm. And I'm showing him what we're doing with the pigs, in the acorn glens in the fields and moving the pigs around the trees and talked about how the oak trees are dying because of lack of disturbance. There's no fire anymore. There's no herds of bison. There's no disturbance anymore. So the oak trees are dying. There's nothing to weed them out, thin them out. Our woods have gotten weedy and all this. I'm a big believer in the permaculture concept. We need more forests and fewer trees. Anyway, so he got all this. He totally got it. He was enthused about it. So we got done, the tour, got back to the house, and he says, so how can I help you? I said, well, let's have a meeting next week at the governor's mansion, and Polyface will lease all the state parks, and we'll run pigs in them and save the oak trees. That's what he did. He laughed, too. I mean, can you imagine a radical environmentalist? Oh, what? But the truth is, from mesquite in Texas to pinyon pine to, the oak forest of Appalachia, we have millions and millions and millions of acres that could be used for food production. There is not one single reason for a concentrated animal feeding operation in the world. Not one. So, if we just look at the 35 million acres of lawn and 36 million acres housing and feeding recreational horses, that's 71 million acres. That's enough to feed our entire country without a single farm. Today, think about what we have with vegetables production, produce. Think about what's been done with spin produce farming. Ben Hartman with his lean farm, 1.5 acres, and every year he adds another $20,000, and it's just still 1.5 acres. Elliot Coleman, the guru of those. Jean-Martin Fortier up in Quebec, full-time plus, part-time employees on 2 acres. Singing Frogs Farm in Petaluma, California. And I hate to start mentioning all these because there are people right in this room that are doing just as well as these. I just haven't met you yet. The point is that what we've been able to do in produce production in the last 20 years to stimulate pounds per square foot is just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. Pasture-based livestock. Look what that's done with new technology, new techniques, with savory and just holistic management and the whole deal. I mean, at our farm, our county average on pasture is 80 cow days per acre. So a cow day, for those of you that aren't in the lingo, a cow day is what 1 cow will eat in a day. So if you took all the food you ate today and put it on a plate, that would be 1 person day of food. Everybody with me? And so what a cow eats in a day is 1 cow day. So for us, in grazing management, a cow day is a standard measure, just like inches to a carpenter or bushels to a apple grower, okay? Cow days. In our county, the average cow days per acre is 80. So an average acre of pasture will support 80 cows for 1 day a year, or 1 cow for 80 days a year. Everybody follow me? Our average is 400. And we haven't bought a bag of seed, put in a seed, or bought a bag of chemical fertilizer in 60 years, and it was the armpit of the community, nothing but a rock pile. When we came 60 years ago, it averaged 1% organic matter. Today it averages 8.2% organic matter. That's not bragging. That is giving humble glory to an infinitely beautifully made system, a template. And it's our mandate to look at that template and not adulterate it, not disappreciate it, disrespect it, but to say, how can I caress you? How can I come alongside and be a partner? We've got this idea today that nature is some reluctant partner that we have to put in a half Nelson, and I'm going to make you do this, and I'm going to get you. When actually, nature is a benevolent partner, a lover, if you will, who simply wants to be caressed into abundance. So imagine if our neighbor got 400 cow days per acre, and his neighbor got 400 cow days per acre, and the whole county got 400 cow days per acre, and the whole state got 400 cow days per acre. Eye hath not seen nor ear heard what can be produced. 100 bushel corn will produce 400 cow day grass. It's the same production, the same pounds of meat or milk per acre, with a quarter of the expenses and no tillage. I asked Alan Nation one time, he's one of my mentors, the founder of Stockman Grass Farmer. I asked him one time, I said, well, my lands, when people figure out how much they can make on perennials as opposed to annuals, and corn's going to be cheap. He said, oh, no. Corn will be expensive because we'll have to pay $15 a bushel to get somebody to tear up the ground. And if that happened, it would bring the perennial annual balance back into historic balance. In the book of, I think it's Habakkuk in the Old Testament, it talks about a harlot being, the price of a harlot being an ephah and a half of barley. It's a little less than half a bushel of barley. It's not because harlots were cheap. It's because barley was expensive. Now we've got holistic management. We've got mixed crop farming. We've got Gabe Brown, Colin Sice, pasture cropping. We've got, Gabe Brown up here planting cocktails, spinning, we're running spinning circles around the conventional production. Ray Archuleta, boy, he'll spin circles around anybody. But what we know now about crumb structure and soil and the microbiome, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. It's so much more cool than chemicals. I mean, it's almost like the other side. You would think culturally, the way the other side is mesmerized by chemicals, you would think that a bag of 10-10-10 apparently is more sexy than a bag than compost. I would suggest there's a lot more sex in a compost pile than there is a bag of 10-10-10. But anyway. Number three, symbiotic integrated systems produce way more per square yard than monospeciated segregated systems. Our current agricultural system is highly segregated. Factory farming, puts up a building and it stuffs animals in there that are fed by feedstuffs that are fertilized by something from over there. So you've got the chemical fertilizer produced here and then trucked over here to produce the grain, to be trucked over here to feed the animals. And then there's so much manure that instead of the manure being a blessing, it turns into a curse. And the manure has to be trucked over here, or fortunately in North Carolina, you get a hurricane about, once every 2 years to flush the toilet, and, then you can continue to live. Anything that turns something that nature views as an asset into a liability is inherently wrong. We believe that farms should be aesthetically and aromatically, sensually romantic. So they can be embedded in a community. So you can have nook and cranny farming. Look what we're doing now with urban farming. Urban farming is just taking off, and it's so wonderful to see. Backyard chickens are becoming, legalized. The technology for modalities that are mobile, modular, management intensive. I mean, the electric fencing. I mean, the fact that today we can take an electric fence and keep out, a wolf and a coyote and a bobcat and a raccoon and keep chickens in with something that 50 meters only weighs 12 pounds and you can take it up and put it down in 10 minutes? I mean, who'd have thunk that 60 years ago? Grandpa would give it his eye teeth. When people come to our farm for a tour, I make a lot of point about saying, don't anybody leave here and say, oh, we just went to this cool, nostalgic farm like Grandpa had. No. Grandpa would give it his eye teeth to have the stuff we've got. We've got electric fencing that's so mobile and portable, we can now take a herd of 800 cows and we can steer them across the landscape, basically put a steering wheel, an accelerator, and a brake on that four-legged sauerkraut vat pruner of biomass and move them around the landscape with the same precision as a zero-turn mower on a golf course. Is that not cool? And half the people out there have never even heard of electric fence. They don't even know what it is. So that's pretty cool. I'm a big believer in integrated systems. Kitchen chickens. I mean, Pat Foreman, the chicken, she wrote the Chicken Whisperer. I mean, she is the chicken whisperer. She wrote the book City Chicks, all about the rejuvenation of chickens in the city. And I'm a big believer that every kitchen should have enough chickens attached to it to eat the scraps coming out of that kitchen. If we did that, according to her research, if 1 in 3 households in America did that, there would not be any egg sales in the U.S. The whole factory egg industry would just collapse. Yeah. I mean, you can throw out your dog, your cat, the boa constrictor, and the gerbil cage and put in 2 chickens in your condominium. Now you don't have to carry garbage out to the curb. The landfill doesn't have to get filled with it. And you get a couple of eggs, and if you really want the best role model for your teenagers, there's nothing like a chicken. I mean, the chicken is the first animal awake in the morning. They work all day turning trash into treasure. And as soon as the sun starts to go down, they head for the rack. They don't prowl around at night beating up people's matchboxes or, tearing things up, getting in trouble with the police, you know. They have the best. What a great role model for kids, you know. Chickens. Kitchen chickens. Solariums on the side of every house. Every house in America, every institutional building, every college gymnasium should have a solarium on the south side. If we did that, we wouldn't be trucking leafy greens from California. You know, in my opinion, there are 3 really good uses for petroleum. You ready for these? The first one is to make plastic for season extension. Cold frames, solariums, hoop houses, season extension, everywhere, all over the place. Number 2, water pipe. So we can send water everywhere. On our farm, we've got 8 miles of buried water pipe that comes from permaculture-style ponds up on high ground, gravity feed, 70 psi water, 8 miles, no pumps, no electricity, no nothing, on a grid of pipe. You know, if we'd have been putting our, anyway. The third one is building ponds. You know, back pre-European, these 200 million beavers I told you about, they had 8% of the American landscape underwater. Think of what that would do for hydration, for migratory waterfowl, for diversity of landscape, cattails, biomass production, flood mitigation, drought mitigation, all that heat sink for ambient temperature amelioration and transpiration and evaporation and rain and wow. Now we're at 0.5. All right, number 4, spoilage. If we could eliminate spoilage or eliminate elitist, snooty, non-blemished food eating, for the first time in human history, nearly 50% of all human edible food is thrown away. That has never happened. You know, all the people that are running around henny-penny, we're not going to feed us, we're going to run out of food. They don't address this situation. In fact, 75% of everything that's gone in sanitary landfills since they were started, 75% is compostable. That is solar carbon equity. We're depriving the soil of what would actually grow earthworms from carbon. You know, but it's okay. We put a bladder over the top, stick a pipe in it, and then a greeny weenie award for environmentalism for capturing the methane to run the cotton picking pushers and dozers that make the pile in the first. I mean, have you ever seen a culture be so successful at the wrong things? You know, Stan Parsons, the founder of Ranching for Profit Schools, he used to say, we've become extremely gifted at hitting the bullseye of the wrong target. And that's a tragedy of the human experience, isn't it? Look, our problem, our weak link is not that we're lazy, not that we're negligent. We've all got places to go, people to see. We got full calendars. Man, we're busy, right? We're doing things. Tragedy of the human experience is that we're successful at the wrong things. And I don't want to come to the end of my life and look back and say, man, I sure built that thing. That's fantastic. But it was the wrong thing to build. So there are reasons for all this wastage. It's the wrong fit. It's too long, too short, too fat, too thin, too crooked, too whatever. I was talking to a guy lately that was he just come from Zimbabwe, from a green bean manufacturing plant that was exporting green beans to Europe. And he said at this plant they were shipping 2 tons a day, and they were landfilling 2 tons a day. I said, wow. They said, well, they're too long, too short. They won't fit the box. This is the inherent waste in this industrial food system. The blemishes. I mean, look at the blemish. I mean, boy, if an apple has one little thing on it, boom, throw it away. The sell-by dates. Nobody understands them anyway. They don't mean anything, but they're there. Transport damage. Just stuff boxes that get damaged in transport. Front-end loader sticks a prong through the orange juice, that sort of thing. Recalls from labeling infractions. My goodness, let me start on labeling law. I mean, if you got to have, it's got to be 1/32 of an inch taller pica, or it's mislabeled. But the thing is, they don't say it's mislabeled. They say it's a hazardous food substance. And regulatory glitches. Oh, you missed a thermometer, on such and such. Foodborne pathogens. We've certainly seen a bunch of that. In the early 2000s, the Government Accounting Office, the GAO, did a bipartisan report on foodborne pathogens. This is one of the few things I've seen that the government ever got right. Okay? Listen to this. Here's the report. I won't give you the whole report. I'll give you a condensed. 4 things. They said 4 things. 4 vulnerabilities of our food system. Number 1, centralized production. Number 2, centralized processing. Number 3, subtherapeutic antibiotics. And number 4, long-distance transportation. Now, if I got this list and I was a congressman or I was a senator and I got this list, I would think that I would have the sense to ask, well, if that's the problem, what's the opposite of that? I mean, am I the only one that thinks this way? So let's see if in our collective wisdom here, a bunch of peasant pitchfork farmers can cipher what would be the opposite of this list. Let's see. Centralized production. That sounds like a lot of decentralized family farms. We're all the same. Okay. Number 2, centralized processing. Well, that sounds like community canneries and small abattoirs and right. Yeah. Subtherapeutic antibiotic use. Well, that sounds like immunotherapy via habitat improvement. And number 4, long-distance transportation. That's a hard one. That's a real hard one. Long-distance transportation. Let's see. I've got to think about that a while. Can somebody what would be the opposite of long-distance transportation? Local. Did anybody in government look at this report and say, man, we need to change the trajectory of our agro-industrial complex? No. Now we're going on 20 years since this report, and it's just gotten worse instead of better. Just remember, folks, whenever someone says we're going to run short of food, that's Monsanto's favorite playbook, because fearful people will swallow anything for security. Number 5, and I'm done. Are you glad? Number 5. The 5th reason that we can feed the world, or the fifth way that our tribe can feed the world, is to unleash the latent entrepreneurial food and farm community by deregulating direct producer-consumer food commerce. I would not be true to myself if I couldn't weave this message into this. Here's the deal. The thing you got to understand is that all food regulations, and I don't say food safety regulations because they're not about food safety. They are simply food regulations. Look, I can go out and shoot a deer on a 70-degree day, drag it a mile through the squirrel dung and the sticks and the rocks and the mud, tie it appropriately to the front hood of my blazer, and parade around town in the setting sun for 2 hours to show off my trophy, and then take it home, string it up in a tree, and now it's dark. Well, I got to leave it there a couple of days till I skin it out and, cut it up. So I'll leave it there, and some flies get on it, it hangs there in a tree. Then I go out and I cut it up, and I can feed that to my children. And I'm being a great patriotic American. But if I take a steer on a nice 30-degree chilly November day and dress it on a nice clean patio on the back and keep it nice and cold and the flies off, if I sell one T-bone steak to a neighbor, I'm a criminal. What is it about exchanging money that suddenly turns something from a great patriotic act to hazardous substance? This is not about food safety. It is about regulating the marketplace. And the problem is that food regulations are highly scale prejudicial. Look, if I want to make pepperonis, and the government requires me to have a $5,000 thermometer to make pepperonis, that's nothing if I'm making a tractor-trailer load at a time. But if I'm making a 5-gallon bucket full at a time, suddenly that $5,000 thermometer just shut me down. Now, people say, well, give me an example of non-scalable regulations. You're so, hip on this. Well, I'll give you a good example. Speed limits. Doesn't take any more effort to put your foot on the brake of an 18-wheeler than the brake of a Prius. That's a non-scalable regulation. That's okay. Okay? There's no more cost involved. There's nothing. But whenever a regulation is discriminatory, prejudicial against scale, that's a bad regulation by definition. See, the prototypes, innovative prototypes, require embryonic launches. And the problem we've got right now, and I can just imagine a show of hands here, how many of you, if you could make quiche in your home kitchen and sell it to the folks at your church, how many of you would do it? Sure. And the hands go up. And I could do raw milk. I could do, a bunch of things. All right? I mean, I still haven't gotten over the fact that I was kept off the farm for several years because my deal was I can milk 10 Guernsey cows, sell the milk to the neighbors at supermarket price, not even higher because it's organic, and make a good living on 10 cows in my neighborhood. The neighbors wanted it. I wanted it. I'd have made 10 cows really happy. There was only one problem. A bureaucrat said, you can't. And I have forgiven, but I have not. That's the difference between me and God. God forgives and forgets. I forgive, but I don't forget. That's a real human problem. But the thing is, when an idea, a dream, an entrepreneurial dream has to be birthed at scale. It can't be birthed. It's a stillbirth. And what we've got are consumers desperate for innovative solutions to supermarket pablum and farmers desperate to join food commerce. But there's something in between. It just denies the farmers a chance to sell and consumers a chance to opt out of what's in the supermarket. I mean, so we've gotten to the where, you can feed your kid 3 Coca-Colas a day and that's perfectly safe, but a teaspoonful of raw milk is a hazardous substance. That's the idiocy of these. We live in and here we live in an age of tolerance. Tolerance. We're supposed to tolerate all sorts of things. GMOs. We're supposed to tolerate the fact that coming soon to the cereal box next to you is nanoparticles to course through your veins, and that's going to be a wonderful advancement for the human condition. We're supposed to tolerate that. Well, how about tolerating my freedom to purchase the food of my choice from the source of my choice? That's the mantra. That's the mantra of the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, which everybody here should join. See, the supermarket, for all of its funny packaging and all of its pretty pictures, is not an abundance place. There's a lot of stuff missing at the supermarket. Raw milk, homemade charcuterie, Aunt Matilda's pot pie. The small-scale, community-based food systems would explode if we had a food emancipation proclamation. And if we took the shackles off of the local food system. You know, I hear a lot about food deserts. Every time I get into the urban sector, everybody wants to know, what do I think about food deserts? What's the answer to the food deserts? Well, the answer is not food banks and scratching in at Walmart, you know, Jolly Green Giant cans of green beans. Just imagine, a lot of food deserts are in kind of crumbling parts of town. Just imagine if an entrepreneurial single mom of 4, let's take a bad case scenario, you know, decides that vacant lot next door, you know, I could put a nice big garden in there, a hoop house up, have some chickens over there, and I could start making chicken pot pie for the community. So she gets her 4 kids out there, and she starts to put in the garden and does this and gets her eggs and gets all this together, makes her pot pies, and she goes and she makes the first one and sells it to the lady across the hall from her in the tenement. Within 30 minutes, there's going to be about 10 bureaucrats knocking on her door. Where's your HACCP plan? Where's your bathroom? Where's your wall fire extinguisher? Has OSHA approved your handicapped access? Are the beams in the building rated for commercial, or is this just residential? This is not zone commercial. This is, you know, everything. I mean, can you imagine if we would have eBay today? If in order for you to put an item on eBay, you had to take a class in eBay manipulation, and you had to get a license, an electrical certification that all the cobweb of wires coming out from under your desk were not a fire hazard, and you had to have an OSHA inspector come and inspect your makeshift desk and plywood thing. So when you got your first big bid on eBay and you jumped up, you could get a splinter in your hiney from jumping up from the plywood and the makeshift desk behind you. Would we have eBay? No! That's the point. And so the problem is when this kind of abundance in a community doesn't exist, people don't know what they're missing because they haven't seen it. It's really hard to paint desire in something that doesn't exist. So the solution to food deserts is freeing up people to be able to do it. So right now we have a growth of PMAs, personal membership associations. We have a burgeoning, that because of the tyranny of this food regulatory requirement, we have burgeoning circumvention outfits like the Personal Membership Association, private food buyers clubs. I just met a lady in North Carolina. She started a food church, 501c3 food church. You join my church, you get food. It's part of our religion, religious expression. My microbiome demands this. It's gotten to the point where circumvention is more efficacious than compliance. In fact, a handful of us are thinking about putting on a national road food conference next year. How many of you would be interested in being able to come to a conference for a day and you leave and everybody walks out with templates on how to circumvent the system? Wouldn't that be cool? Here's my question. Who could possibly oppose freedom of, and I'm picking my words carefully, who could possibly oppose freedom of choice among voluntary consenting adults to self-determine the fuel for their 3 trillion member microbiotic community? You want that one more time? You want that one more time? I wrote this down so I could say it. I couldn't even remember this thing. Who could possibly oppose freedom of choice among voluntary consenting adults to self-determine the fuel for their 3 trillion member microbiotic community? If we took the shackles off of this, there would be an explosion of food from suburbia and rooftop gardens that would completely invert the power, position, and prestige of the current agri-industrial food complex. It would be brought to its knees by a day of reckoning called liberty. We don't use that word much. We're almost afraid to use it. You can't have thriving small business and growing government. We've tried regulations. What do regulations get us? They get us hydroponic organics. How about trying liberty for a change? Who needs the stranglehold of mechanical food when the pitchfork of biological farms and food producers can access neighbors with better tasting, nutrient-dense, soil-building options? We'll win going down. So let's go feed the world. We're the ones who can, and we're the ones who care. So these are 5 significant threads of how we are, how we can, and how we will feed the world. I salute everyone here who understands that we are in a disruptive time. And it's a wonderful time. And the energy here is palpable, and it's just great to be able to be here, to visit, and to articulate that we have the answers. We don't need to sit here and apologize for it puts more people on the farm. No. We need to be proud that what we do puts more eyes on an acre and reverses the rural-urban economy. We say we're in the reverse commute. The folks at our farm, our employees that we have, they live in town and they have to come to the farm. The rush hour is going into town, because everybody's got to go to town to support their farm addiction. And our folks are coming out from town. There's no traffic. It's cool. Yeah. In the afternoon, they're going in, meeting everybody else coming out. This is the reverse economy. And we absolutely can feed the world. We can do it more magnificently and without any downsides compared to the other side. So what do you think? Are we up to the task? You bet. Okay. So now may all of your carrots grow long and straight. May your radishes be large but not pithy. May tomato blossom end rot affect your Monsanto neighbor's tomatoes. May the coyotes be struck blind at your pastured chickens. May all of your culinary experiments be delectably palatable. May the rain fall gently on your fields, the wind be always at your back, your children rise and call you blessed, and may we all make our nest a more productive, abundant, caressed, joyful place than we inherited. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.